Adrian Newey's latest creation made a very delayed arrival at the Formula 1 Group Shakedown in Barcelona. The Aston Martin AMR26 rolled out of its garage after being completed by the team at the very last minute. Its brief first run ended with the car stopped out on track, but that still gave the opportunity for a very short look at the car and to draw some initial first impressions of its design. So here are my initial first impressions of that design and of the AMR26. Note that at the time I'm making this, the available imagery is extremely limited, and a lot more about this car will become apparent as it spends more time out on track. The front of the car is immediately interesting, with the nose looking to be really quite bulbous with a very curved underside. The available images do not really let us see the true shape of the underside of the nose at this point, but you can get a pretty good idea. And that idea reminds me an awful lot of the 2009 Williams, the overall shape of the tip of the nose in particular. There's a small slot in the tip of the nose for driver cooling, it's fairly standard. The front wing supports on the nose seem to be quite small, but they will have been designed to withstand the loads required from the front wing. Now, Aston Martin was rumoured to have failed its mandatory crash tests and had to be reworked as a result. There's not been any confirmation of this from the team, but it could explain the delay to the car arriving. Teams have to pass a wide range of tests before running the car. The ones you see here are generic crash tests, and it's not just the nose of the car that gets tested, but also the roll hoop and the rear impact structure as well. The front wing on the AMR26 is really quite interesting, as the three elements of the wing appear to be completely solidly linked together with metal components. While there may be some linkages we can't see in this image, I'm really struggling to see how the rear two elements of the front wing can move independently of the leading element of the wing when the active aerodynamics are activated. I don't think this wing has the active aerodynamics functionality employed on it at this point. The front wing end plate appears to be fairly conventional in its shape and overall design, but it doesn't feature the upper aerodynamic element used by some teams and shown off on the original show cars. The tyre sensor pod, though, is very clear to see. The Aston Martin uses conventional brake cooling air scoops, but they have been really quite neatly designed and sculpted. Looking at the suspension, the car uses pushrod actuated torsion bar suspension all round. Looking at the front wishbone layout here, note just how low the rear leg of the upper wishbone mounts to the chassis. It's almost at the same height as the lower wishbone inboard mounting points. The composite structure on this part of the monocoque and the inserts around that must be really quite interesting indeed. The roll hoop of the car is really quite interesting, with a simple triangular airbox feeding the Honda V6 engine. There's no centerline cooling used whatsoever. The rollover structure has a pair of forward remote supports which are quite widely spread out. There's also a very small cooling slot behind the driver's head. This isn't particularly unusual, we've seen that on many cars in the past. Obviously of note though are the aerodynamic elements on the roll hoop. A number of teams have similar devices, but the AMR26 versions look to be the largest we've seen yet. The lack of centerline cooling means that the underbody cooling is almost entirely reliant on the ducts in the side pods, which are reasonably sized, with the overall design of them quite similar to recent Aston Martin F1 designs. However, there do appear to be absolutely huge cooling exits on the engine cover itself, with a very sculpted channel behind them. And from the rear you can really see how huge those cooling exits truly are. The pushrod rear suspension is also notable in this image, with the upper wishbone inboard mounting points looking to be really quite high up, almost above the exhaust tailpipe. Moving back forwards in the car to the cockpit area, alongside the trailing edge of the halo, there are some vertical aerodynamic elements, again something we have seen in the previous generation of cars. As I mentioned, not using centerline cooling means that the side pod ducts are generally a bit bigger on cars without it, though on the Aston Martin they don't look to be absolutely huge. However, note how the side pod is slightly wider than the inlet duct itself. The side pod overall does look to have some degree of undercut, but overall the side pod does seem also to be quite narrow, with a lot of the top surface of the floor exposed. Its overall shape though does seem to be quite conventional. Above it, the engine cover has some really interesting sculpting. Underneath the airbox, it seems to almost fair in the gap under the roll hoop and leave the airbox ducting down to the engine quite exposed, though the panels here don't seem to quite line up, perhaps a few fit and finish issues for this very hastily put together car. The engine cover itself also seems to be quite low and dips down notably, making the fin seem a bit taller. The rear wing end plate features a lot of sculpting on both its inner and outer edges. It's a little hard to see in the available images, but it is very much there and it's well worth a closer look. The vertical aerodynamic element on the leading edge of the floor is a triple element design, which isn't unusual now, though it appears to be a bit lower in height than some of the others we've seen so far. The uppermost element also seems to sit slightly inboard of the elements below it, and while there are longitudinal elements, there's no vertical part to it like there are on some other cars. The small details at the leading edge of the underside of the floor also look very interesting. I'm really looking forward to getting a better look at those. Looking at the rear floor, there's a cutout on the inner edge of the rear wheel, something we've seen on quite a number of the 2026 cars now. There are also smaller holes in the floor ahead of the rear wheels, and that's a feature seen on most cars in 2026. I think though there are some more interesting bits to see in this area of the car, but the imagery just isn't good enough yet, and having the car all black makes it a quite difficult thing to differentiate some of the surfaces going on there. Underneath the bodywork of the new Aston Martin is Honda's brand new RA626H power unit. Like all 2026 Formula 1 power units, it consists of a 1.6 litre V6 engine mated to a very potent electric motor. At the end of the 2025 season, the Honda power unit was considered to be amongst the best in Formula 1. However, the combustion concept that Honda had used on that version of its V6 family of Formula 1 engines couldn't be transferred to the 2026 V6 engine due to the lower compression ratio imposed by the technical regulations for the 2026 season. Of course, there's still an awful lot more to learn about the Honda engine and indeed the AMR26 itself, and I suspect there's still quite a lot of secrets still to emerge. For now though, those are my very first observations of the new Aston Martin. There will of course be much more in-depth analysis to come on F1 TV. If you've enjoyed this very quick first look at the Aston Martin AMR26, then please do hit like and subscribe, as I'm doing a video like this for each of the new 2026 cars. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon, somewhere in the pit lane.